Today we're going to build an industrial park in Cities Skylines 2, and it's not going to choke up our sims with air pollution. We'll use a number of non-industry assets to create a dedicated, modest industrial and office area that will look an awful lot like an industrial park you might see in real life. As this isn't going to be creating air pollution, we'll be able to locate it anywhere in the city we want, so I'm going to pick this spot beside the railway and the highway interchange. On previous episodes we started our suburban downtown, then we built the beginning of the government building district. Here we'll be creating even more jobs and improving some of the city services at the same time. As per the last few episodes, I'm going to start by naming a couple of more areas in the city. The very first YouTube member I had was called Prog Station, so I can't think of a better name for our transit hub that combines the train station with the custom bus station, so that's going to be called Prog Station from now on. Perfect. The second area to name is going to be the college build. That's going to be named after Patreon member Michael, so here I'm going to name this institution the M. Smith Institute. Thanks for the support, bud. Hope you're happy with that one. Before cracking on with today's build, I'm going to quickly revisit the previous episode, and specifically I'm going to revisit the water features that featured prominently in the Vista walkway element of the build. I had modder Elgendo reach out to me on Discord and let me know he's released custom water surfaces. If you want to install these yourself, I'll leave the links below. They're not in PDX mods yet, so you would need to manually download and install them yourself as per the instructions. Immediately I thought about replacing these water features, and although I had the height of the water pretty much bang on, it seems to have sprung a leak and it's quite a bit lower than I had it previously. So I decided to remove the water features and just level the area out. Applying the new reflective water surfaces is easy, it's just like using any other surface using the existing tools. Here I'm doing it through the extra detailing tool mod. As you'll see on the screen, there's quite a few to choose from. I landed on one of the green ones, and have a look at the reflection on that. It's absolutely phenomenal. Looks really good. The trees, buildings and the monument all show up really well on the reflections. I'm happy with that addition, and I can see myself using it quite a bit going forward for the water features. Also, if you get the angle right, you can get the reflection of the sun in it as well, and that's quite a striking effect, isn't it? Lovely stuff. Right then, let's get on with today's build. I've gone ahead and cleared off most of the existing trees and bushes. I want a nice clean area to build on. Initially I thought about bringing the traffic in off the collector road near the railway bridges, but it was just a bit too close to the junction, and I reckon there might be issues later with that as we add more of the buildings around here. So I've decided to create another collector off this main arterial here across the road from the high school. I'll bump this up to a 2-way 4-lane later, and it should be enough to keep things running here. Good number of the buildings will be non-functional, so I'm not overly concerned about the total traffic entering and leaving today's build. However, this collector road will connect to other parts of the city across the highway, so I need to keep that in mind. Part of the reason I'm working on this area today was to address the temporary placement of some of the important service buildings, namely the post office and the taxi depot. To get things going, I just threw them down here in previous episodes, but it did bug me every time I saw them sitting there out on their own, so I knew I'd have to give them a suitable build and a suitable surrounding. I think these assets would look pretty good in a normal industrial area, but I think what I'll be building looks a little bit more realistic. You know that I'm not a huge fan of existing industry assets in the game, and if you didn't know that, you could probably guess it, as we're now into episode 15 and I haven't really done a proper industry build. I guess I'll need to bite the bullet and do one soon. The idea with the layout is to have a post office and its upgrades feature in the middle of the build. I want the taxi office situated somewhere where it transitions from the post office and the pseudo industry stuff that we're going to do into the office park. The industrial units or storage units will slot in behind the post office, and it will fill that gap nicely. The asset I'm going to be using won't generate any air pollution, but it will cause noise pollution. So having it situated alongside the railway and far enough from any homes seems like a pretty good solution. That said, the noise pollution isn't that bad, it's really just a road's width. For the industrial units, I'm going to create a secure storage facility. I'm going to use the alleys and I'm going to have all the industrial units packed tightly together. The asset I'll be using is the post office garage. They do have a monthly upkeep cost, so keep that in mind if you're building it yourself, especially with the upcoming economy patch, which is going to make things a little bit more difficult in terms of raking in the cash for your city. The nice thing about these blocks is that they have garage doors on both sides. So I'm going to make the most of that, and I'm going to create the illusion that these units are accessible and operational on every side. Interestingly, in the next patch, these units might actually spring into action. Add-on or upgrade buildings are looking like they're going to be functional within a certain radius of the main service buildings very soon, so they won't need to be snapped on directly onto the main asset to be functional, which is a really good change, and I think it opens up an awful lot more options to create builds, especially for vanilla players. So I had popped Anarchy on and gave the units a small overlap to create larger blocks. Once they were all boxed off with alleys, I used the copy and paste functionality and just created some parallel blocks across the road. I deleted all the fencing as we kind of went along, and I want to detail the place up myself, and I'll copy and paste a few more blocks as we go along, put them into place. With the addition of the final road here, we're left with an awkward triangular space. I'm going to look for some office assets, and they can function as something of an administration block or a headquarters maybe, you know, for the industrial units and storage units and whatnot. I'd like a larger asset in the corner with some standard parking. Then once I can find the right asset and the right colour, I'm going to add some single story offices, bind them all together as one irregular shaped building. With the roof looking a bit untidy, we can delete all the objects there on the building roof, and on the building added at an angle, we can just lower that section just enough. We can hide the outline of the new roof. That looks sweet, really good, happy with that. I think along this wall it's missing a little something, so I'm going to stick a side door on it, and that should break up the plainness of that part of the building. To fill the last part of the triangle, I think a little bit of functional and non-functional parking should hit the spot. To complement the post office, I've reserved this spot for a mail sorting office. Probably jumping the gun in terms of getting this in the city with its current population, but does no harm. Sims love having a good mail service, and it will need to be added in at some point. Having it here in the mini industry and an office park build was too good an opportunity to pass up, so it's definitely in. It makes sense in terms of the surrounding building sizes and densities. There's good transport links with the arterial and the highway road connection nearby. There was just the perfect space available to upgrade round the back. I love it when that happens. Now, with the big stuff in place, I'm going to draw a layout for the office park element. It should complement the existing buildings nicely and provide a bit of contrast to the cream and concrete elements we've created already. I'm not going to do anything too complicated here. I'll create an alley framework that we can zone from. A small custom car park will feature here off the normal two-way roads, and once it's in place, I'll add a couple of commercial zones to service the workers in this part of the city. Now, I want to get a couple of bits and pieces done here before moving on to a bit of detailing. Let's tidy up the rail line with an extended quay wall. I'm going to pull it out in an easterly direction, as this will form part of the future rail service that will be made operational later in the series. I'm going to pull the collector road out here and make a couple of at-grade crossings, and I reserve the right to redesign that at a later date depending on how the traffic runs here later down the line. I'll fire in a couple of standard car parks and a few of the commercial assets that I mentioned earlier, and that should be it really in terms of adding the buildings really. With the path going in parallel to the collector road, I reckon we're ready for some detailing now. First thing I think I'd like to do is to make the unit area secure. I'll use the parking assets and I'll just fire in a little security station and a couple of barriers, same as a country club all that way back. Obviously for it to be secure it will need to be fenced off, so I'm going to use the high industry fencing for this one and just surround the area, it's all off. Once more, I'll remove the external internal fencing on the assets. I want to have that nice open look within that facility itself. And I'm going to use the standard concrete surface for in here, and then the lighter one for the car park. That car park will need to be fenced off, so I'm going to use the same fencing as the outside perimeter. Then we'll extend it alongside the building asset next door and finish that bit off. There's various bits of fencing, pathwork, surfaces I want to get in at this point. I'll start with some of the car park detailing too. I'm going to crack on with that and I'll catch up with you in a minute or two. After introducing the crosswalk here, it appeared to be a bit too close to the bus stop. You can see that the bus stop on the other side of the road disappeared, so rather than running a path across the road, I've just put it back in with road tools. And actually there's a lot of foot traffic along this section of the road. I reckon I'll need to have a good look at this, figure out if there's any public transport gaps in this section of the city. Putting a new stop in is easy, you just plop it down and drag the line over so the buses stop. The only thing I was concerned about was the pink line pathfinding in the transit hub. I've tried making a couple of adjustments to the road network on this line and the pathfinding was not happy, it would knock it out of service. So I just need a quick check here that it's still connected, and it is, so brilliant, happy days. Yep, it's all working as intended. Moving on now, I'm going to revisit this patch of rough ground, and what I'm planning to do here is to create a little bit of a derelict area. To do this, I'm going to use a combination of assets to build up some nice textures and create an interesting little bit of interest beside the electricity transformer. I'm going to use the sidewalk decal to hint that this area has previously been built on. It works really well as something as a fine rubble as well here. So a little bit of brush tool first, and then we can fine tune exactly where I want them to go using individual placements. To create a base to build off, I'm going to use the riverbed rocks decals. I'll create two large patches here, one on each side of the road. To add a bit more colour, I'll carefully add some moss decals in between the pavement decals we put on at the start. The different layers are all starting to work together and create something of a realistic depiction of an abandoned lot now. Jumping in to find it, it's time to add some props. Searching for rubble will bring up quite a few options to choose from. I'm going to use the rubble pile concrete first. I'll keep rotating it to avoid any obvious repetition in the placements. I like the way that the moss appears on the rubble on the outside of the piles, it's a nice effect that. I'm going to add a few wood piles, but I don't want to add too many. The main thing I'm trying to get across here is some leftovers from some abandoned buildings, so it should primarily be concrete we're looking at here in terms of prop work. Some broken foundation pillars should look the part, but having a look at it in the editing, I reckon I've probably added too many, so I might go back off camera and delete a few and scale it down a little. To add a bit more colour contrast, I'll sparingly use some of the dirt decal. I'll add a little bit of colour and it slots nicely under the rubble and the woodpile props. The dark colour can be a bit domineering on that prop, so definitely a light touch required here with that one. To finish up the area, I'm going to put in a sparse mix of trees and bushes. I'll plant a few within the derelict area itself so it looks a little overgrown, and then we can move on to the industrial unit detailing. I'm going to add a few other little spots of detail here and there, just add a little hedge at the back of this building, and we'll just add a little bit of shrubbery and a little bit of decal work to the building across the road as well. I'd like to allocate these units specific numbers as you might expect them to have in real life, so I'll grab the number decals and we'll get started on that. As I said in the video earlier, there's garage doors on both sides, so if you box them off of the road and remove the internal fencing, it looks like there'd be activity on both sides of the asset, so this is a nice effect, and I'm going to number it accordingly. In terms of the prop work down here, I'm going to keep it fairly simple. I'll use the picker to grab some objects and repeat them. I'm going to add some additional props like storage containers, boxes. I'm adding these more to break up the repeated objects found when we place down the same building asset several times. It can look a little repetitive and a little unnatural if the props are spaced out identically along every block, so we'll just break it up a little bit now. We can add a little colour and a little bit more interest by adding some of the no parking decals here and there. Along the front of that big mail sorting facility, there's a few gaps to fill as I placed it a little bit further back from the road. Very simple stuff. We're just going to drag out the surfaces along the front road so that gap is filled, and again I'll just use the picker to repeat the tree pattern this time. That'll give us a slightly larger looking assets with some extended roads, so we can extend out the fencing actually where we're at it here as well. Time to settle the build into its surroundings. So we're going to use the usual sized medium North American deciduous tree brush. As these buildings are a bit more tightly packed, I'm going to go back over and manually place down a bit of a mix of the larger sized trees. So I'm going to use some spruces, hickories, and then of course we'll be using the oaks as well. That should give us a good mix of vegetation, and it will create something of a barrier to the train lines running nearby. Not that the sound of the trains is really going to bother these guys, but it does look a little bit better. In terms of the decal work, I'm going really light on this one. The only thing I've done was really just add a few decals to create some disabled spots for some of the parking areas, and I've added the worn surfaces where the cars would be driving, and then some of the dirt decals to give that slightly worn look. Interestingly, when I added some decals to the car park and the mail sorting asset, it removed some of the built-in parking areas, so no matter, just a case of slotting them back in and happy days. I decided not to add much to the industrial unit area, storage area. I think I'm happy with that looking like a nice new shiny build. A little job I've been meaning to do was to add a tree barrier to the highway and the railway lines along here. It should look an awful lot better and be a bit more realistic and fit in with what you might find in real life. As this corner of the city is basically completed, it's also time to fence off the railway as well, and we'll keep everyone safe and we'll just block access to the rail line. In keeping with previous episodes, I'm going to use this opportunity towards the end of the video to create another little low density residential neighbourhood. It'll have a simple rounded layout with little cul-de-sacs. This layout should hopefully prevent through traffic using it as a shortcut. I'm hoping they'll stick to the arterial roads for the main part, but we'll see. And this should be a reasonable sized development that will be residential only, with maybe the exception of one or two small commercial lots. The development itself is within walking distance to our Rotunda commercial district and not too far from schools and health services, so not too concerned about lack of services down here. As we're rolling in the money now, I think it's time to start reducing the tax burden, and one of the main bugbearers of the Sims are high taxes. I'm going to bump the residential taxes down a bit. We'll see how things go. At the time of recording, we're waiting for that big economy patch to drop, so by the time you're watching this, I might have already revisited the tax situation. It'll be interesting to see how the city does after its introduction. So once I get the final touches done here and just get some of the oaks and the last remaining trees, I'll add some of the paths and we'll connect up some walking routes to some of the arterials and the collector roads here. Yep, I think I'm happy with that. It's a nice little addition. So we've managed to create something of a mixed use light industry build here, and in doing that we've created a fitting surrounding for some of our city services. I think we've managed to make something of a realistic build with a good mix of building sizes and functionality. We've got a dedicated secure storage area which you'd typically see near some light industry or warehousing, and it gives an appropriate place to situate a small adjoining office park which fits in with the likely land use here. Breaking up the area with a little abandoned lot or two looks pretty nice, and I reckon that'll be something the city would look to develop sooner rather than later. I think the surrounding businesses would thank them for it too. Also, thanks to my Patreon and my YouTube members, your ongoing support is hugely appreciated as always. Thank you very much. So, something of a different build today, which was pretty nice. I certainly enjoyed building it, and if you've enjoyed watching it, you might want to check out one of these builds.